All right, welcome to a Memorial Day episode of the Mike Sennello Show. You guys are going to have to bear with me because we started the show right off with technical difficulties. Today, we're going to be going over all of the facts that have taken place over the last 2 weeks since we last had a show. And there's a lot to get into tonight. So before we get started, so folks know, thanks for tuning in. If you guys want to watch on YouTube, link is in this video's description to watch on YouTube. If you guys want to join in the conversation on Facebook, hop in on Facebook. Links in this video's description as well if you're watching on YouTube. Facebook killed the original broadcast, so that's why we're running a little bit late, because a copyright claim was issued on Tchaikovsky's 1812 Overture. So I don't know where that's coming from. I don't know if there's something nefarious going on. I'm not going to make any wild suspicions, but yes, that's why we're running late. That's why we're starting off with some technical difficulties. I am testing out broadcasting in full HD 1080p. So folks in the chat, please do let me know how that goes. I'm really curious to see how that goes. And of course, thanks everyone for tuning in. Thanks everyone for bearing with me as we get through tonight's technical difficulties, because it wouldn't be an episode of tonight's show without all of that. So let me just bring up my notes, because we're going to have an incredibly long show tonight. It's not just because there's a lot to go over from what's happened over the course of the last 2 weeks. It's because we are going to get into some things that are going to require a lot of facts. And some of this is going to be a little bit redundant because we've gone over some of this in the past, which I'll talk about and we'll get into in a moment. So let's dive into tonight's show, because we're going to go way over our time limit here tonight. And we will, of course, get to your live commentary as we always do. Just so folks know what's coming up, I'm going to be reaching out to some folks to get to some interviews, and I think we're going to get ourselves in trouble tonight. And if you guys want to stick around for something that's really going to get me in trouble tonight, that's going to come on the YouTube channel. Because if I'm going to get yeeted, I only want to get yeeted from one place, from one publisher. So if that's going to be the case, let's leave it to YouTube. And then if I get kicked off YouTube, then so be it. Because there's something we're going to go over tonight that, well, it's probably going to get us kicked off. Probably going to get us a ban hammer. So at the very end of the show, we'll go over that, and I'll tell you what that topic is when we get there. But the first thing we're going to get into is stuff that happened here in New Milford. So a few weeks ago, we did have our referendum. In short, both the Board of Education side of the budget and the municipal side of the budget passed unedited. As folks may know, we've talked about this pretty much endlessly on the show. We kind of beat this to death. The budget that was approved by the Board of Education was approved by the voters at referendum, which is where that budget actually comes to fruition, as well as the municipal. And because of the amendments because of the Charter Revision Commission, because of the revisions to the charter that were made effective in the 2019 referendum, those two budget votes are fully bifurcated, and in this year, they both passed. So let's bring up just a little bit of those results. For those of you who missed out on this is a follow-up. This is a follow-up of the same report that I put together in 2018. It includes updated information. And it's going to include some visuals, because this is kind of a lot of information to digest. So we're going to have some graphs and some graphics to make all this data really easy to digest. If you went to the town council meeting, or you watched this past town council meeting, you watched me use up all 5 minutes and then maybe a few seconds extra of my public comment to go over all of this. So tonight, here on the Mike Sennello Show, we're not going to limit ourselves to 5 minutes. We're going to get into nice detail as to what the budget vote results have been and their turnouts. So I'm just going to go ahead and just remake that same presentation I made on Monday night. So in case you can't, in the event that let's zoom in a little bit. Let's make this 130%. Right? So you guys can see this a little bit easier. All right. So these are the budget turnout the budget results and turnout rates for the last 23 budgets going back to 2004. It might sound weird that I've gone with only 23 and not some nice round number. That's because this is a follow-up to 2018. And it seems odd that I would stop at 2004. That seems like a weird number to stop at. Well, it's not anything nefarious, folks. It's just that getting data prior to 2004 is extremely difficult. Prior to 2014, you do have to go into the dungeon next to the town clerk's office. And since you can't, and you're going to have to rifle through thousands of pages of absolute Bibles in terms of the records of these budget votes. And you're going to have to do it with a pen and paper. No phones, no scanners, no electronic research. You're going to have to do this the really, really hard way. And in 2018, I did that. I went into the dungeon and I did this the really, really, really hard way. And getting information from 2004 to 2014 alone was incredibly difficult. And it's just going to be, the town's going to have to hire a consultant to get anything behind, to get further back than 2004, plainly. And they're probably going to have to bring in George Buckby, drag him in, and say, what do you personally remember offhand, off your mind, off the top of your mind, to get information prior to 2004. In 2003, for example, there were 3 budget referenda, and it's impossible and because everything is just handwritten sticky notes in God knows what order inside those Bibles from 20 years ago, it's impossible for me to differentiate between what results actually correspond to what referendum. And in fact, even in 2004, 2005, and 2006, there's kind of some judgment calls that I had to make on things like the number of registered voters. And in this case, of course, in the newer years, in the more recent years, we have we have much more reliable information. In the case of 2004, 2005, and 6, for example, I had to make a judgment call between what the town was presenting and what the state was presenting as the number of registered voters because there was some differentiation. So again, I already had to make some judgment calls, and I already had to do some agglomeration of various sources because they weren't all in perfect alignment to get to things like the total number of registered voters. So in short, what I've done here, and you guys can all download this, I put the link in the previous video's description, which I should be looking up to the Google Doc where you guys can get all of this information. And I should have that on hand, and I don't have that. Sorry, folks. But the short version is what I've done is I've put all of the passes and I put all of the fails in boldface so you can see them easier. In short, since 2004, the municipal side of the budget has never failed at referendum, and the Board of Education side of the budget has failed 5 times at referendum. So to see what the turnout rates look like over the course of time, and we're going to get into greater detail on this matter in just a hot minute. To see what the turnout rates look like, that's what they look like. And you know what? Let's zoom in on this one too. Let's make this 150% so you guys can see this a bit easier. And let's jump over. So I've had to actually hand draw this mean. By the way, folks, if you want a printed copy of this, reach out to me. Let me know in the comment section, and I'll find a way to get a printed copy over to you because I do have those here with me. And I did submit them for the record, so they should be in the public record if you ever want to get a chance to take a look at them. So these are the turnouts. And you can see there is the mean, 16.03%. Yes, I did have to hand draw that line in, so it's not perfect. What you can see from 2022 all the way on the right is that our turnout this year was much lower than the mean. And last year was the lowest turnout of probably all time here in New Milford. And you can kind of see, too, that starting in 2011, there began a trend over here in 2011 of much reduced turnout rates from 2004 to 2000, compared to from 2004 to 2010, which is why if we go to the summary here, at the bottom, there's some weird numbers here that I'll explain real quickly. Everybody should know what a standard deviation is. If you don't, then then you'll have to look that up. It allows me to get to things like the Z-score and the voter turnout performance. So what I've done is I've bifurcated the results from 2004 to 2022 and the results from 2011 to 2022. And that's because of that differentiation that I showed here, and you can see visually in this graph, so that's why I did that in 2018. I don't think I'm going to do that moving forward because that trend seems to have either reversed or proved itself to not be necessarily permanent. We'll see how things go in the years to come if I decide to keep that bifurcation. But the short version is this year's turnout performance has a performance rate of 19%. What does that mean? That means, before I put people to sleep with the math, that this year's results would project to be higher than just 19% of budget referenda from 2011 to 2022. So based on that data, it would project to be outperforming just 19% of turnout. So pretty low turnout. And that's probably because, well, we'll get into why that is the case in a minute. But just so folks are clear, these are the total number of qualified voters by referendum. Where I get all of this from is directly from the town clerk's office, and we're going to get into a minute where that comes from in terms of the most recent data. And we'll get into the advisory questions too in just a moment. The reason I'm not including the data in the advisory questions is that the advisory question format changed starting in 2019, and we only have 3 years worth of data on that matter. So that's kind of a very small sample size, and I just didn't have time to do that. So these are the total voters. What this usually refers to is the number of qualified electors, which is different from qualified voters. So qualified electors are people who are qualified to vote in the referendum, but are also residents of New Milford, and there are some certain citizenship requirements. Qualified electors are people who can vote in an election in November. You don't have to be a qualified elector to vote in a budget referendum here in New Milford. All you have to do is own property, which means you don't even have to own land in New Milford. You could own a car in New Milford. You could own business-related capital in New Milford. Now, there's a threshold for entry before you can vote, right? So you can't just own some $50 clunker that's just parked in somebody's front yard and doesn't run, right? And it's not even worth the value. It's not even worth its own scrap value, right? So that's where some of the funkiness comes in terms of the older data. But you can see towards the end here, there has been a spike in registered voters since 2019. It seems to have dropped a little bit since 2022. You can see what those qualified voters look like on that screen. Which brings us to the data that you can see in margins. I didn't have really time to go over all this. Let's zoom in on this as well. Let's make this a solid 150%. But these are the margins. And what you can see in these margins is that in addition to the fact that the municipal side of the budget has never failed at referendum, the percent margin by which it has passed has always well exceeded the Board of Education side of the budget. We've beaten to death why I believe that's the case, but one thing that we can point out from 2000, starting with the third vote in 2018, is that towards the end here, we're getting much larger margins, and all of the budgets are actually passing at referendum on the first attempt. So that to me, that speaks towards the leadership here in this town, because I've argued, and I think it's a fair argument to make, that our elected officials do have a duty to the voters to produce a budget that will actually pass at referendum. And as you can see here, not only are they passing at referendum on the first attempt, they're passing in huge margins, which I think is actually then reflected in the very low turnout rates that we've had very recent in the last few years, which is if there isn't a lot of anger, if there isn't a lot of hubbub about the budget referendum, if there aren't a lot of people saying, man, that's terrible, I'm going to go vote against it, then we're not going to get a lot of turnout. So to me, if we look here between 2011 and 2016, also much lower turnout rates. Between 2011 and 2016, much lower turnout rates. True, though I don't know if that necessarily corresponds to greater margins, though. From 2011 to 2017, both budgets passed on the first attempt, and at least the municipal side has some pretty wide margins, though as we can see in this graph, they've been pretty consistent in terms of their margins, except in 2017 and in those several votes in 2018. So again, this speaks generally, at least, to the leadership in this town and the changes that have taken place as a result of that leadership. So folks have asked about so where do I get all of this from? I told you that I had to go into the dungeon to get all of this data. So at the town clerk's office, if you go over the last few budgets, they now can just simply print out the final results, and it looks something like this. And this does include the advisory questions, which, as you can see, stack very heavily in favor of, if the budgets, in both cases, if the budgets were to not get passed, the number should be lowered, right? So that's how it looks this year, and this is where you can derive all that information today. Now, there's a lot more information today in this 2022 result that you can see on screen right now than there are in, say, even the 2021 result. Also, asterisk, there was no budget referendum in 2020, so that's why I don't have any data from 2020. So what you can see the results here. You can see where I'm getting this information from. I'm just turning this into an Excel spreadsheet and then pumping it out into a manner that is extremely easily digestible. So that's what happened as the results of the budget referendum. And we're going to come back to this in just a minute, because what happened in that budget referendum is actually going to affect a topic that we're going to be bringing up momentarily. The other thing that's happened, good news, really cool thing at the event that took place was last weekend. We had the GOAT Days, which of course is a acronym for Greatest of All Towns. Great event. It seems that my guess is that this event is going to completely supplant the Village Fair Days, and we've probably seen the last of the Village Fair Days. And quite frankly, I'm going to say something that may piss some people off. I don't care. I really enjoyed the GOAT Days. I really enjoyed the fact that we now have an event that's going to feature local vendors and local nonprofits. That's going to look like what the Village Fair Days looked like 40 years ago. And that's kind of a neat thing that's happening. I would definitely expect growth. Yes, as I don my Lions Club hat, we had kind of stole the show there with our Lions Club train. For folks that missed out, this is what that looked and sounded like. So that's what that looked like. You guys could see it. There were all kinds of animals for the young kiddos to check out. There was, of course, the Lions Club with our Lions train that we did have to repair on site. Just like the Sennello show, of course, the Lions Club has technical difficulties. Great event. Awesome thing to look forward to for next year. This weekend, we had the Memorial Day Parade. No, there was not enough time for me to turn something around for that. But the short version is that, of course, what Memorial Day is a day to celebrate and to honor those veterans who have sacrificed their lives in defense of all of the values and wonderful things that this country stands for. All of the ideas and virtues that this country stands for, and not just the mere fact that this country has borders. And that includes all of the Enlightenment ideas that then it became the rights protected and enshrined by our Constitution and its Bill of Rights and the following amendments. So, before we get started in our next topic, so people understand what those veterans sacrificed their lives for, and not only what they sacrificed their lives for, but to understand what the thinking was behind all of that. I highly recommend everybody check out on my other channel, Mike Reads, link is in this video's description. We did wind up going over the Federalist Papers, and you can see that is. You can let me go ahead and share this link in the videos, just in the comment section here. Excuse me while I bring this up. Here's the link in Facebook. Here is the link in YouTube. So you guys can check out that series. We read the entirety of the Federalist Papers on my other channel, Mike Reads. I highly recommend everybody checking in on that, because not only did they go over what was behind, not only did they go over the Constitution and why it is that they were trying to form a more perfect union of several states, which is what our Constitution creates. They went into the Enlightenment thinking that went behind all of this. And very quickly, when it comes to the Bill of Rights, they hardly even mention it in this book. And the reason that's the case is because they thought that the enumerated rights in the Bill of Rights were so obvious and so taken for granted that listing them, itemizing them in the Bill of Rights would do nothing more than confuse the issue. That's how obvious they were. So when they finally did actually put forth that Bill of Rights, the Bill of Rights was intended to be an extremely plain language read, as in take it to mean quite literally what it meant in 1787, when the architects of our Constitution framed and wrote that Constitution. So again, highly recommend checking out the other channel. That's the playlist. Do read or listen to the Federalist Papers, where they go into great detail as to why that is. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because we are going to have a conversation about the Second Amendment, right? And the Second Amendment is extremely plain text, because the topic that's going to come up is the shootings that have come up over the course of this weekend have, of course, immediately been politicized and been used as a leverage to elicit policy relating to gun control that is not borne out by any of the data, and just is a complete rejection of those fundamental ideas for which our Constitution exists to protect. Those fundamental rights that pre-exist government. And we are going to get into what the actual Second Amendment means when we get towards the end of this, right? Again, I should be bringing this up so I have it right before me, but how's it go? It goes the preservation of a well-regulated militia being necessary for I forget how it goes. Let me go ahead and just bring this up real quick so I can get the exact text here. Second Amendment text. So we're going to get into exactly what the actual, here we go, text to the Second Amendment of the Constitution, just so I can get it. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. So that's the subordinate clause. All of the rest of this is the actual description of the right. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed, right? So this could be rewritten to say, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed because a well-regulated militia is necessary to the security of a free state. And we're going to go into great detail as to what that means. They do, in the Federalist Papers, they do briefly mention what that means. And there are documents that come after that from those actual framers who wrote that to say, yeah, if you want to have a cannon in your merchant ship, absolutely. If you ever read, again, on that channel, I read Common Sense by Thomas Paine. Thomas Paine argues that we should be arming the merchant ships with freaking cannons, and that's how we're going to be able to defeat the Navy of the British, right? So before we get into that concept, before we get into all of that, we do have to go over facts. And before we go over the shootings themselves, we're gonna get sciencey. We're gonna get really data-y, and it's gonna be a little bit dry. But you know what? Deal with it. We have to do this. And of course, the first thing I want to say about all of this isn't a matter of data, but is a matter that we're going to come back to in a moment. And it should be if you get nothing else out of this video, reactionary politics is the worst politics. Reactionary politics cannot breed anything other than terrible policy, no matter what that's related to. And that's especially true in the case of mass and school shootings, which, for the record, are extremely rare. And when I say rare, I mean ridiculously, incredibly, extremely rare. And that is, you can see here, according to even PBS, they are actually uncommon incidents that account for just 0.2% of firearm deaths, not 0.2% of deaths, not 0.2% of the likelihood that you're actually going to run into them, but 0.2% of firearm deaths. And the highest number of firearm deaths since 1981 was, 2020. And I think we all know what the reason for that is. But here's your firearm deaths, again, according to usafacts.org. And what you guys are going to see is I'm using deliberately left-wing sources. These are sources that absolutely have an agenda, that absolutely have a gun control agenda. And that's because I'm trying to take the most charitable take of my opposition. And we're still going to be able to present the same conclusion. All right, so let's go to what it says here. 45,222 deaths, which if you pump that into your calculator, 0.2% of 45,222 deaths is, about 90 deaths per year. Folks, if you want links, let me know in the comment section and I'll share the links. We've got a lot of links to go over tonight. So I'm not going to be constantly stopping so I can pump them into the comment section. Let me know if there's a link you want, and I'll get to it when I get a chance. So the highest number of firearm deaths since 1981 was 45,222, which equates to just 90 deaths in that year if we're to use the highest numbers. Now, that isn't to say they aren't a tragedy. They are absolutely a tragedy. But that's extraordinarily rare. That's unbelievable. The likelihood of you dying in even so much as a mass shooting, which is defined as a shooting in which there are greater than or equal to 4 victims that were killed, regardless of whether or not the perpetrator was also killed in the mass shooting. And the number, by the way, of mass shootings, and this is going to surprise folks, I think, the highest number was in 2019 at 471. Most of these don't actually result. The highest number of mass shootings, according to Gun Violence Archive, and we're going to come back to deaths in a minute, which is a little bit different of a definition. This is 471. Here is what those results look like. Excuse me. I just got to hide something real quick. There we go. So this is where those mass shootings are. What do you notice about all of this? They're all in gigantic cities, right? They're all in crap hole cities. You'll also notice that there are some gigantic cities, some pretty decently sized cities that aren't on this list. This is 2022, of course, by the way. You're not going to see Fargo, North Dakota on this list. You're not going to see Boise, Idaho on this list. You're not going to see Billings, Montana. These are cities that are at least the size of Hartford, Connecticut. You can see a dot for Hartford, Connecticut in 2022. You're not going to see one for these type of places. So the trend is big cities. And, it's borne out in the data. So again, if we're going to go back to if we're going to go back to USA Facts, there's your firearm deaths. That's total firearm deaths, right? What we care about, of course, are the homicides, so it would be nice to break those out. But unless you're living in one of these giant cities, the likelihood of you being shot and killed at all is unbelievably low. So that's the trend of things and where things come from, that these things are happening. The reason you're not hearing about a lot of this is because they're coming from these huge cities, and we'll get to the narrative in just a minute. There is another way to define these sort of things. Now, I said mass shootings. What are mass murders? Well, we can go to that as well. These are the number of mass murders. So mass murders are a shooting in which there are, according to the FBI, is a lot smaller of a number. Let me bring that up for you. This is according to the FBI. So according to the FBI, they're pretty doggone rare. So when I said shootings before, I think I probably should use the definition that was used by, what was that source I had before? The Gun Violence Archive. So it's greater than or equal to 4 victims. And according to the FBI, it's greater than or equal to 4 deaths. So this is how unbelievably rare mass murders are. And if you want to compare mass public shootings, which is a little bit different, we can go to gunfacts.info. So the question, of course, then is, where do we stack up, compare? What does all this mean, right? Is this actually like a lot? Is this something that we should be looking at? Is this something we should be comparing ourselves to other countries with? Well, this is what we look like when we compare ourselves to other countries. And let me go ahead and zoom this in so folks can see this a little bit better. Yeah, there are a lot of countries that have way more mass public shooting deaths than we do here in the United States. Now, I realize that 2012 is a little bit old data, but that's the most recent data I can get if we're going to compare ourselves in terms of mass public shooting deaths. Again, the definitions are changing a little bit as we go. Part of the reason I'm doing this is to show you that when you define, it's important to properly define things. Otherwise, you're going to lose the data. You're going to lose the point here. Again, in the United States, pretty doggone rare. And despite the graph that you've seen, compared to other countries, compared to the bottom end of those countries, we're really not that far off from the median when it comes to mass public shootings. And we're really not that far off from the bottom end of things when it comes to the mass public shootings. And the lesson to be taken here is, despite the media hype, these incidents are extraordinarily rare. And to account for all, to extrapolate this even further, here's a list of the most deadly. Why is this? Here we go. Most deadly shootings. And what you'll find is, if we scroll all the way to the bottom, you're going to recognize some of these. You're going to recognize them, right? Las Vegas shooting in 2017, 58 people dead plus the gunman. This is one of those rare cases. This is actually one of those common cases where we're not going to be, or in this case, in the case of Las Vegas, we're probably never ever going to know the motivation behind all of this. Then there was the Orlando nightclub shooting in 2016 with 48 dead. And we're on YouTube and we're on Facebook, so I can't go into the motivations behind that shooting, where the perpetrator was Omar Mateen. So I can't go into Omar Mateen's motivations, though they are very obvious. There was the Virginia Tech shooting, which, again, 32 dead, and I can't go into his motivations because Sung Hyo Cho killed 32 people. So unfortunately, we can't go into his motivations because we're on Facebook and we're on YouTube, and there's a narrative to maintain. And then as we go around, you're going to see Sandy Hook at 27. You're going to see the Sutherland Springs at 26. You're going to see a Luby's Cafeteria in Texas in 1991 at 23, plus the gunman. You're going to see El Paso, Texas Mall, which happened in 2019, 22 dead. And as we scroll down, you're going to see that these are going to become older and more obscure. 1984, 21 dead. Then there's Marjorie Stoneman Douglas in 2018, 17. And those numbers, Columbine in 1919, 13 plus the 2 gunmen. Oklahoma Post Office in 1986. You're going to see 1966 from the clock tower gunman. We're going to get into to low end of double digits and single digits really quick. So if you ever look at things like risk of dying during one of these types of shootings, you have to understand that a handful of these shootings, mass shootings, are accounting for virtually all of the deaths that have resulted from these mass shootings. And yeah, I know what folks are going to say. Like, Mike, none of this is news. We know about all of these shootings. We've all heard of this. And you may say you hear about these things all of the time. Okay, so one of the other lessons I want people to understand is, do not succumb to the plane crash effect. It's something I went over in a video on my series on It's something that I went over on my series on philosophical concepts. Hope folks will check this out. I actually will share this link in the comments section here. So let me bring this up. Here's the YouTube comments. Go ahead and check that link out. That's on my YouTube channel, where I go into the plane crash effect. What is the plane crash effect? In short, the idea is you ask somebody, what's the safest way to travel per passenger mile? Well, the answer is by plane. Well, you hear about planes crashing all the time. Well, yeah, because it's news when they crash. Not only is it news because it's rare, but it's also news because it's always a mass tragedy. It's always lots and lots of people instantly vaporizing in a ball of fire, right? The reason you hear about plane crashes all the time, apparently, is because you hear about all of them. When it comes to these mass shootings, the reason, and the school shootings as well, the reason you hear about them happening all the time is because you hear about all of them, right? That is, in short, the plane crash effect. I go into greater detail in that video. Do check it out. Reactionary politics makes for bad politics and policy. Understand that the media is always going to cover every single one of these mass shootings when it's politically convenient, so you're going to hear about it all the time, right? But that doesn't change the fact that these sort of things are extremely rare. And we talked about mass shootings, so now let's go into school shootings. And this is how unbelievably rare school shootings are as well. This is from the Center for Homeland Defense and Security. So because this is kind of small, let's zoom in on this one as well. Let's make this as big as I can make it and still be able to see it. So the red is non-active shooter. We're going to come back to what the definition of active and non-active shooter is, and it's going to be extremely relevant. So what we're going to actually do is just look at active shooter. That's the number of active shooter incidents by year, going back to 1970. So you can see it wasn't all that common in the 1970s where we had, 1, 2, 3 a year. But even in the highest year, we're talking about going from 1 or 2 or 3 to 11, to 7, to 1, to 9, to 2. Okay, so again, though they have increased over time since, say, the 1970s, we're still talking about an infinitesimally small and extraordinarily rare incident. It is not appropriate to make policy, to make general the rule out of what is obviously the extraordinarily rare exception to the rule. This is why reactionary politics are bad politics, right? So we see how rare they are, and I explained that we'd go over what an active shooter is, so let's find out what an active shooter is. Okay, let's go to active shooter. Boom. In addition to the situation, incidents are labeled as an active shooter when, and I've highlighted this part, the shooter killed and or wounded victims, either targeted or random, within the school campus during a continuous episode of the violence. So active shooter basically means there was an actual shooting. It basically means in the case of a school shooting, it wasn't some hunter who happened to accidentally come into some field, on some 100-acre school campus and shoot a deer, right? That's what that means. That's why when we go back to a non-active shooter versus active shooter, the real number to look at is the active shooter number. These are incredibly rare incidences. But when it comes to these incredibly rare incidences, where are they actually happening? Now, there's another, according to the same database, we can look at the total number of incidences over a much larger period. So let's look at what that looks like. Do I have this right? Is this the right graph I want to bring up? Yeah, okay. So where are these happening? Let's zoom in a little bit on this one too so you guys can see it better. Where actually are these things happening? It's going to speak to a greater issue, which we're going to get into in a minute. The majority are happening in the parking lot. Yeah, 9.9% in the classroom. And then we have beside the building, in the hallway, okay, in front of the school, on the football field, on the school bus, outside on school property. In a field general. Okay, so if we take all of these slices of the pie that are definitely might not be like the courtyard, but definitely are not inside the four walls of the actual physical building, we're talking about 59% of these school shootings are taking place not within the four walls of the buildings. So for people that are saying what we need to do is lock down the actual doors, remember that the type of school shooting that you hear about in the news is not the type of school shooting that is the most common type of school shooting. And that's further evidenced by where, in terms of geography, these school shootings are taking place. We have to zoom this out to see this correctly. So from the same place, the Center for Homeland Defense and Security, we have another dot map. What do these dots say? Again, gigantic cities. If we go to, let's say, what this cluster is, right? We can go in here and we can see, holy crap, that is a lot of shootings over the last however many years. Just outside Chicago, Norwich, Chicago. Drive-by shooting, illegal activity, drive-by shooting, escalation of dispute, illegal activity, drive-by shooting, accidental, right? We can go then into places like Baltimore. All right? Look at where these dots are. Baltimore. So the overwhelming majority of these dots, and we can go to LA and see another giant cluster of dots. LA, Athens, LA, Compton, Long Beach, right? Like we would expect to see what? Some Inglewood always up to no good. Fairfax High School in LA. Let's go to Connecticut, right? Let's go to Connecticut where we have some cities. Bridgeport, Hartford, right? Population over 100,000. So let's go to another city that's got a population of over 100,000. Fargo, North Dakota, which is, none. None over the 20-something years of this period, not one. Okay? What is this telling you? What is all of this telling you? Right? We can actually go into, what's the chart idea that I want? Yeah. Now we can go back to, now that we've seen that dot matrix, we've seen where in terms of the physical properties these shootings are happening, we can see what's basically motivating these sort of things. Number one motivation is escalation of dispute. This is the type of shooting we're talking about. Not necessarily the motivation, but the type of shooting. Escalation of dispute. Accidental, which is something different. Suicide attempt. Illegal activity. Drive-by shooting. Indiscriminate shooting. Domestic with targeted gang wars. This is just gang wars. This is inner city gang wars. This is not the type of shooting that we get in Uvalde, Texas. It's not the type of shooting that we're getting in Sandy Hook, Connecticut, right? This is not the type of shooting that makes the news. And we all know why. And we all know why, who it is that are in these gangs in these inner cities. And we all know that because I'm on YouTube and I'm on Facebook, all I can say about all of this is that the reason these ones don't get covered is because Thugnificent shooting up another Thugnificent with a stolen gun that's been bandying around the gang for decades and is going to always remain stolen, doesn't fit the narrative. So you're not going to get that conversation. Speaking of which, the overwhelming majority of these things are done with handguns, which again speaks to what I was just saying. This is statista.org, .com. This, I believe, is I want to say this is data driven by Johns Hopkins in partnership with Johns Hopkins. I want to say in the FBI, but here we are. According to statista.com, it's the overwhelming majority are done with handguns, not rifles. Again, what is this speaking towards? It's not speaking towards the type of gun really matters in these situations. And we can even do the same thing. If we look at the number of deaths, what we can do to get those number of deaths is derive them from, well, here's a listing on Wikipedia of at least 95 of the incidences that have taken place, school shootings that have taken place since 2000. 2000 usually being the starting point because Columbine happened right before all of this, and that's when we get a lot more data as a result of Columbine. Well, somebody has actually gone through the effort. I realize this is just some dude basically on the internet, but he's gone through the effort to put these statistics together, and what have they shown? 95 total events, gun type, handgun. Quote unquote assault rifle is 7, shotgun is 7, total deaths 232. By gun type, again, handgun 139, quote unquote assault rifle 51. Again, it's not the rifle that's doing this. It's the super majority of not only the number of incidences, but also the number of deaths are happening with handguns, not rifles. Not short barrel rifles, not long rifles, not rifles of any kind. Handguns. Handguns. And again, the reason I'm bringing all this up is because this is not the narrative you're going to hear, but this is what the data show. We talked about the theme of the show today was going to be facts, 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 facts. And this is what we're seeing. 2/3 of all school shootings are with handguns. And the thing is too that we can compare ourselves to, when it comes to these shootings, to other countries, right? And let's bring up what that looks like. These are mass public shootings in advanced countries, 1998 to 2012. I know it's going to be really hard to see this font, but that's where we are, right here. Right in the middle, right about in the middle in terms of both the number of incidences, the number wounded, and the number killed. Mass public shootings in advanced countries, and the asterisk there translates to top 25% of socioeconomic status scores combining educational attainment and per capita GDP. And we get this, of course, from the bottom right, from gunfacts.org, which I highly recommend everybody check out gunfacts.org because there's a lot of just raw data that doesn't fit the narrative on that site, and that explains where all of this research is coming from that you normally hear about and that you normally see. So when we're talking about mass public shootings in advanced countries, we're kind of in the middle, right? So as far as how we fare, we're really not faring that bad. But I'm sure you guys have seen graphs that suggest otherwise. Now, this one says mass public shootings, and I guess if we're going to talk about gun control, then we're going to be talking about homicide. We're going to be talking about murder in general. And the reason that you're not going to see this type of data, the reason that you guys haven't seen these charts, the reason why this might actually be news to you is because you've been lied to. And you're going to be continued to be lied to. I'm sure you guys have seen things like this from CNN, this type of graph. The U.S. has the highest firearm homicide rate in the developed world. I'm sure you've seen things like this listing from PolitiFact of homicide rates and gun homicide rates here. I think this is gun homicide rates against selected countries. And we've got another more complete list from Bloomberg of whatever these countries correspond to, right? The thing is that this is gun homicides, right? Yes, when it comes to gun homicides and comparing us to very wealthy countries, we're kind of an outlier. But they do this as though we can't open up Microsoft Excel, go to their own sources, open up Microsoft Excel, pump in their own data and extrapolate from that non-gun homicides in addition to that. They treat us as though we can't just take their own data from their own super biased sources with clear agendas and look at their own cherry-picked countries with the guns magically removed from the picture using this wonderful tool called Microsoft Excel. I did that. I spent the time and I spent the effort going to their own site, gunpolicy.org, which if you ever wanted to see an anti-gun agenda website, that's it. That's the website, right? And this is what that website looks like. Let me show you what that looks like. We can go into things like death and injury, and we can see total homicides, any method, and use their own data. This is the United States. We can do that with a number of other countries. And then we can go into gun homicides and use their own data and pull the gun homicide rates out of the overall homicide rates, pump that into Excel, and bibbity bobbity boo. What do you get? You get this graph. Let me pull this up. You get this. Bloomberg can do it. So can I. Where do we stand? When it comes to non-gun deaths, gun homicides, we're kind of an outlier when it comes to those exact countries that I just copied and pasted from Bloomberg. And to make this point even clearer so you guys can see this, that's gun and non-gun homicides, right? Here's where we stand when it comes to non-gun homicides. We're still pretty doggone high. And the ones that are ahead of us include Estonia, Latvia. Why the hell did Bloomberg include those countries? And Bloomberg excluded countries like Singapore. They excluded countries like South Korea. Right? And the way I did this was I went to that website, gunpolicy.org, right? And we showed you the example of the United States, and I just took a 10-year average of the gun homicide rate and the regular homicide rate, subtracted one from the other, and 10-year average based on the most recent data that we have 10 years for. Yes, you're going to see that this graph compared to the Bloomberg graph doesn't include all of the countries that were on that Bloomberg graph, because I couldn't get 10 years worth of data from some of these countries. And from some of these countries, the countries are so small that if I can't get a 10-year running average, then there's no point in doing this, because if I'm just using one data point, then because their population sizes are so small, one incident can radically change the rates. Remember, these are rates per 100,000 people. So when you get a country like Luxembourg, which has a population of like 400,000, or Iceland with a population of like 380,000, unless you can get a good number of years worth of data, you're not going to have a large enough sample size to produce relevant results. Right? And again, I'm taking this from a website with an obvious agenda, right? And again, we're still kind of outliers when it comes to those countries when we use the countries that Bloomberg provided, which again, hyper cherry pick countries. No South Korea, no Singapore, no Qatar, no UAE, no Bahrain, no Taiwan. And if we include these countries that are super rich countries, if we're going to include these countries, never mind the tiny European countries, right? The Bloomberg included Luxembourg, but they didn't include Andorra, Monaco, Liechtenstein, San Marino. And if we did, what we would see is that when it comes to non-gun homicides, the United States is still kind of an outlier. Now, I just used the cherry-picked countries that are from that Bloomberg result. So what if we used something like OECD countries? Okay, we actually have that information. And this is what it looks like when it comes to OECD countries. Again, here's the United States, still pretty terrible outlier. What's below us? Turkey, Chile, Mexico, Latvia, Estonia. Like, I realize that there aren't many gun murders in Estonia and Latvia, but we probably shouldn't be proud of the fact that we have fewer non-gun deaths than countries where you still have bombs, where countries like Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, and I don't know why we continue to compare ourselves to these Baltic states. And yes, this graph was created by a Redditor, so I'm not sure if we can trust it, but the point is clear. The U.S. has a violence problem, not a gun problem. Again, Latvia, the Baltic states are still states where they're using trucks and explosives to kill people, these are still largely backward countries when it comes to violence. And again, you can see that their homicide rate in general is way outside of ours to begin with, right? Now, the lesson to be learned from all the data I've shown, and we've got more, is that the gun isn't the problem. I've shown you the data of what it looks like when we take a Star Trek transporter and just beam me up, Scotty, all the guns out of the equation. We still have a murder problem in this country. We have a problem of culture, not a problem with guns. And again, this is why this result, we've covered this before, but this is why none of the prescriptions made by the gun control groups are borne out in any of the data from within our borders either, right? We went over this on this show before, and I wonder if I have the link to where I've gone over this before. Nope, no, I don't. So it's on this channel. I've gone over. You can go to my Facebook page or my YouTube channel and just type into the search bar on my channel the word gun, and you're going to see a video that says the gun is not the problem, right? And I'm going to go over the same data that we went over in that same video from 2019. Where are we? We are on 8. Yeah. So again, if the gun is the problem, what you would expect is that when it comes to ownership, as ownership increases, as more guns, more homicide, right? More crime. And here in the United States, not the case. Not the case. We can look at we can look at guns per person versus the gun homicide rate. If you don't think crime, this is the thing that matters, right? Like, it's important to point out that gun homicide isn't the only way to kill somebody, that gun crimes aren't the only type of crime. But if we're going to insist on comparing guns per person and the gun homicide rate, well, we can do that. And what you would expect is a parallel line. Nope. Since 1994, from 1994 to 2014, which is the most recent data I have for all of this, guns per person have gone way up. Gun homicides per 100,000 have gone way down, right? And you would expect this to be completely opposite if the problem was the gun. Well, let's look at the homicide rate versus the firearm ownership around the world. You'd expect a nice line. Not really. Nope. Not a correlation. I mean, if there's a correlation, it seems to be very, very, very slightly negative, which means that as more guns, less crime, less homicide. More guns, less homicide. Now, I would not say that's what this data bears out. I would say what this data bears out is that there's no correlation whatsoever, because if we're going to go based on that trend, our R squared value, our actual correlation value strength is going to be extremely low. All right. Well, now let's look at gun ownership versus various crime rates, because maybe there's, if we get rid of the guns, we get rid of other types of crime. Nope. If we look at locations in the United States, countries that, states in the United States, and their level of gun ownership, and we compare that to various crime rates, no correlation, just a blob. You would expect, again, a line, a trend, a graph, some sort of thing where there's at least some sort of correlation, either positive or negative, when it comes to gun ownership. And in fact, what you would expect if the gun was the problem, when it comes to number of guns in a geography, you'd expect a positive correlation, which is as one number goes up, so does the other. As number of guns goes up, so does number of, in this case is, what do we have here? Homicides, rapes, robberies, aggravated assaults. Nope, complete blob. The one place where homicide rates did go up while gun ownership declined, so a negative correlation, was the UK after its buyback. Here's where we do have an actual correlation, and it's the exact opposite of the narrative. There it is. So we can see the handgun ban, we can see the gun buyback here, and number of firearms went down over time, and crime rate went up. Remember that graph we showed of the United States over that same time period? Crime rates went down, gun ownership went up. So I mean, I'm showing you all of this data for a reason, but the point is, if we're going to have a data-based conversation, then we have to have a conversation that's also based in principle and that's also based in reason as well, and not just study says, and not just show me the study. Because when it comes another huge part of why reactionary politics is the worst politics is because my response, right, when it comes to policy prescriptions based on these incidences is always going to be that it doesn't matter if homicides go down if people just pick another weapon. If gun homicides go down, if people just pick another weapon, right? If gun homicides go down and overall homicide rate goes up, what have we done? What have we done? Like, have we actually accomplished anything? Like, we care about homicides. We don't really care too much about how that person committed homicide, right? When we go before a judge, the person being tried is being tried for murder one, not murder one with a knife, not murder one with a bomb, not murder one with a gun, not murder one with, a car, a lead pipe, a rope, the candlestick in the observatory with Colonel Mustard, right? That's not how we do this. That's not how we adjudicate this. And that's because what we care about is the fact that somebody was murdered. We care about the fact that there was a murdered. And if gun homicides go down and people just pick another weapon, we haven't done anything. And that's exactly what that data bore out in the UK. So if you've ever heard the myth of the UK, yeah, gun homicides, I suppose, went down. But the overall violent crime rate and the overall homicide rate went up over the same period that it was doing the exact opposite in the United States when gun ownership was exploding. Which is why, of course, as far as policy is concerned, when it comes to the recent shootings, especially in Uvalde, I'm just always going to say the same thing, which is he's just going to buy it illegally. Which, if you guys have been following me on Twitter, and I highly recommend doing so, perhaps I put a link in the conversation. Nah, link is in this video's description. Right? This is here. Let's see if we can pull up this picture. In case you don't get it, let's beat it into your skull. Whatever gun control policy you're going to institute, he would have just bought the gun illegally. Well, we need to change we need to make it illegal for him to have X number of rounds in the mag. He's just going to buy the gun illegally. Well, we need to get rid of the AR-15. Well, then he's just going to buy it illegally. We need to make it illegal too. Well, then he's just gonna break the law. And if you read these nut jobs manifestos, yes, they're just going to break the law. They're just going to get it illegally. So, folks, follow me on Twitter if you want some dank memes like this. And that's going to be my response to when it comes to the policy question, no matter what. These policies don't address the root problem, which is why they don't work. Degenerate's going to degenerate. When you give a degenerate money, you've just given a degenerate money. There's still going to be a degenerate. You have to fix the degenerate in the first place, right? And this is why you would otherwise expect places with high gun control measures to have low violent crime rates and vice versa. You would expect that if you have a place that has incredibly high gun control, if that actually works, then it should be borne out in the data. Well, that's not true according to how the FBI measures things. So let's, what's that? That is number 13. Here is gun control ranking by the FBI and states with homicides and violent crime. Yeah, no correlation whatsoever. So what if we went to something like the Brady score? Maybe you don't like the way that the FBI is issuing its gun control rating. Maybe it's being unfair in rating states in terms of their gun control levels. Let's go to the Brady score. This is a metric that was invented by the left. This is a metric that was invented by the gun control groups. Yeah, okay. This is a metric that was invented by the gun control groups to establish a score for either a state or a local government's gun control measures. Again, we're using the data that is from the leftist agenda. And here's the correlation. Here's the scattergram. Here's the scattergraph. It's all over the place. There is no correlation whatsoever, right? You might be able to find some sort of, R-squared value of 0.0000 whatever. But I'm sorry, there's no correlation here. There just isn't there. It just isn't there. Now, this is of course, violence. So what about Brady score versus gun homicides? Because this is what we care most about. Where's the correlation? It's not there. If anything, it seems to me like there's a negative correlation, not a positive one, where it's extremely thin, the correlation in this graph, if there's to be one. But it seems like it's actually negative. As the Brady score goes down, the gun homicides go down as well, right? So, again, everything I just said about the gun control, not addressing the root problem, it's borne out in the data. All of the gun control policies If they worked, they would be borne out in the data, and they're not. They're just not. And I'm showing you what that data is. This is based on their own metrics too. And that's before you factor in things like defensive use, right? Like perhaps the reason when you get rid of guns, you have higher crime rate is because of these defensive uses, something that's not even considered when we're talking about gun control policy. So what if we do consider gun control? How are guns used? This is defensive gun use versus violent crime, right? Way, way, way more defensive uses than non-defensive uses, right? And that's even according to the LA Times. So this is a number of studies that have been conducted on this matter, conducted by all kinds of outlets. The one all the way to the left, defensive gun uses, is that blue bar is the LA freaking Times. And yes, this one tiny outlier by Hemingway, right? This one tiny outlier, which is a clear outlier in this data, is the one that everybody goes to. We don't consider any of these other data, which produce a mean of just under 2 million defensive uses, which is way, way, way more than, what does that work out to? What, like 450,000 firearm incidences, which could be suicides. And which could be accidental deaths. So again, this is even coming from the LA Times, that there's way more defensive uses of guns than there are non-defensive uses. And again, another one you'll hear about, another one of these myths you'll hear about is the gun buyback in Australia, right? The gun buyback in Australia happened. They had one mass homicide, right? And all of a sudden, the homicide rate and the crime rates, the gun deaths just fell off a cliff. Well, they declined by the amount that they were already declining by for years. In fact, the exact same amount, right? Not to mention the fact that people are going to say, well, they had no mass homicides. They had no mass shootings after that incident. Yeah, because they had no mass shootings before that incident either. But again, this is straight from the horse's mouth from the Australian Bureau of Statistics. This is number 16. Here we go. There it is. There's that 1996 buyback. And so you can see what I'm talking about. This is the trend. So in the years before the buyback, we're talking about exactly the same decline in gun deaths, all gun deaths, of course, which is mostly attributable to the tremendous decline in gun-related suicides, right? And again, when we're talking about all gun deaths, which is what is usually cited, all of the difference can be accounted for, just about, in suicides. And if you want to get more specific and you want to just look at the homicide rate, well, we have that. Again, we can draw a line. The homicide rate started declining years before the gun buyback in Australia and continued to decline by the exact same rate after the gun buyback. Do you know that actually, of course, the part of the narrative that you'll never hear is that this decline began in perfect coincidence when the Australian government started an initiative that pumped out way more police, that put way more police on the ground. So if you actually want to point to when this change happened, it was when that policy came into effect. All right. The other thing that we should consider is that it's useful to see all of this happening in Australia in context with the United States, where gun ownership was over the same exact time period exploding. That's number 19. Here's what happened in Australia compared to the U.S. So in the U.S., the rate of homicide rate decline actually was greater in the US than it was in Australia, again, over the exact same time period when Australia was getting rid of its guns and the US was buying them at an astronomical, at a borderline hyperbolic rate. The gun is not the problem. Repeat, the gun is not the problem. The problem is one of culture. Not for murder in general, not for mass murder like planes and bombs, not for the insanely rare school shootings. You have to look at why they wanted to kill someone in the first place, right? And the Buffalo shooter, we're going to get into that. I am going to have to take an intermission before we get into that while I get some things taken care of. And we're going to get into that. But in the case of the Uvalde shooter, we don't know what motivated him in the first place, right? And we're going to get into actually effective policy in a minute. Yes, the police failed. So you're going to hear, you've heard on Twitter, oh, the good guy with a gun narrative is busted because the police failed. No, the good guy with the gun narrative is not disproved by this one anecdote. The police who failed in this incident, right? And they usually don't. Well, the fact that they failed in the case of this anecdote is not evidence of a population level trend, because anecdotes are not evidence of a population level trend. But the police aren't the only potential good guys with guns. They're not the only potential good guys that could have guns. And yes, in the Uvalde case, the police failed miserably. And the Texas DPS director said so explicitly. This is cut 1. Let me get that up. Here you go.
Hey, with the benefit of hindsight, stand by, stand by, stand by, right? I got it. Okay. Hey, from the benefit of hindsight, where I'm sitting now, of course it was not the right decision. It was the wrong decision. Period. There's no excuse for that. But again, I wasn't there, but I'm just telling you, from what we know, we believe there should have been an entry at that as soon as you can. Hey, when there's an active shooter, the rules change. It's no longer, it's no longer a barricaded subject. You don't have time. You don't worry about outer perimeters. And by the way, Texas embraces active shooter training, active shooter certification, and that doctrine requires officers, we don't care what agency you're from, you don't have to have a leader on the scene. Every officer lines up, stacks up, goes and finds where those rounds are being fired at, and keeps shooting until the subject is dead, period.
Which is exactly what every parent of any kid ever would have done, no matter what. They don't care if it's going to take 30 dead parents to get this guy dead, to get the shooter dead. If, think about it like this. If 300 parents are unarmed and just barge into this building, right? And it just becomes a matter of, a war of attrition, and 300 unarmed parents barge into this room, this shooter is going to kill like 30 of them before he finally gets subdued. And these parents bludgeon his skull in, because that's what they're going to do. And rightly so, every parent is going to say, those 30 parents that died, it was a tragedy, but they're heroes, and every one of us would do it again. Every single one of us would do it again. Yes, the police failed miserably. Not only should they obviously have entered, and I think they should get rid of the policy when it comes to schools, right? Here in New Milford, here's a lesson we can learn in New Milford. I really hope this isn't the case, that we have a barricaded shooter differentiation, right? To me, if you're a police officer, right, the barricaded shooter situation should not be a consideration when it comes to school shootings. If there's a school shooting in New Milford and you're a police officer, I don't care if you've only got 3 rounds left in the chamber, you go in. End of story, no matter what. Just like every civilized adult on earth, kids or no kids, is doing, armed or unarmed. And that's exactly what wound up happening in Uvalde, right? Not only did they fail to enter the room, the police actually prevented parents from going in themselves. And this is from The Guardian. So again, remember, we want to go to this. Yep. And we want to get rid of this. Excuse me for going to The Guardian, but when they're right, they're right. Like they point out, more could have been done. Texas police under scrutiny over response to school shooting. Gunman remained barricaded inside a classroom for up to an hour before his rampage was brought to an end. Texas law enforcement agencies are facing escalating criticism over the response to the mass shooting at Robb Elementary School in Uvalde after it emerged that the gunman remained locked inside a classroom for up to an hour, while a large number of police officers massed outside the room without taking any action. And it's going to explain here that what actually took place is not only did they not enter the room, they were straight up arresting parents who were trying to break through the police barricade to get into the room, to get into the school themselves. Straight up arresting them. Straight up preventing parents from getting into there who were willing to sacrifice their own life in the name of saving these kids. We also know that dispatch This was a team effort in terms of a failure. We also know now that for that entire hour, there were kids in those rooms calling and begging for help over the phone, and dispatch blackballed them because they were whispering. And you're not supposed to whisper to dispatch. Of course they were whispering. It was an active shooter situation, and they were hiding in the classroom. And since this was happening over the course of an hour, obviously dispatch had time to go over and go, hey guys, the guy is still shooting kids in the classroom. There are still kids in the classroom. Kick that door in and shoot this guy dead, right? Like, obviously this, I don't even think that when it comes to school, like if this happens at the DMV, that's one thing. But when this comes to kids, like every civilized adult is barging into that room, no matter how well equipped they are, and with a complete disregard for their own safety. And if every sane adult is doing that, then absolutely that should be the policy within police. The barricaded shooter situation consideration should not be made when it comes to school shootings, right? Let me bring up my notes so I can bring things back, right? Again, yeah, the kids were calling 911 from inside the rooms and were getting railroaded by dispatch because they were whispering, and now they're dead, right? This actually speaks to all the more reason to have a broader interpretation of the Second Amendment. If they were your kids and you had a gun and you could assemble some posse, which is what wound up happening anyways to save a lot of these kids, if you could assemble a posse with guns to barge through that police barricade and rescue your children, would you? Would you assemble the New Milford militia to just come in and barge through that police barricade? If we had a New Milford militia that was armed the way the U.S. military is armed, how long do you think the police barricade would have stayed up in force? Do you think they would have said, all right, stand down. You know, the New Milford militia is bringing in tanks and howitzers. Stand down. And for Pete's sake, this is the reason the Second Amendment exists in the first place. This exact situation is why we have a Second Amendment in the first place. For when it comes to tyrannical government and government overreach. It's there specifically so that you can take on government in these situations. And yes, if that means there's going to be a shootout at the OK Corral outside the school as well, if it's your kid in there and you have a gun and you can assemble a posse to take on the police first before you take on the shooter, if it's your kid in there, are you doing it? Absolutely. Absolutely. And everyone can understand that. This is the whole point of the Second Amendment. The whole point of your right to defend the lives, to defend the life and liberty and the property that you have produced, either through yourself or through your children, is obviously the reason the Second Amendment was there in the first place. So that the New Milford militia can just bulldoze a police barricade with a tank and howitzers to rescue their kids. And by the way, when it comes to that Second Amendment that we read out, right? Well regulated in 1787 meant all it meant was well trained. Militia meant every able-bodied male. And by the way, that's all part of a subordinate clause, which means the way we get to well-trained, able-bodied males is right to keep and bear arms. The way we are able to have well-trained, able-bodied males is the right to keep and bear arms, which shall not be infringed. Which, if you understand English, is the important part. The shall not be infringed. The right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. And the reason that the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed is so that we can have well-trained, able-bodied males. That's what it translates to in the simplest of English. And speaking of this, I just talked about armed parents. How many armed teachers would it have taken to shoot this guy dead? What if you were a teacher in this situation? If you were a teacher in this situation and you had a firearm in your holster, are you hesitating? Are you going to wait outside the classroom? Or are you going to shoot through the glass so you can reach in through the glass of the window, unlock the door, cut up your hand on the glass in the process, kick the door open and just unload into this guy, even if it means you got to die in the process? I know there are teachers that watch this show. I know it. How many teachers? Raise your hand now if you're a teacher and if you had a gun in this situation, you're not hesitating. You're not hesitating. And again, the question is, how many armed teachers would it have taken to shoot this guy dead? And do you guys care? Right? So again, you've heard me say this before town council. I'm not one to complain without providing a solution. I'm not one to complain about a problem without providing a solution to the problem. And again, the first lesson is reactionary politics and reactionary policy is the worst policy. But if we're going to have a policy when it relates to this sort of thing, prescription number 1, homeschool, homeschool, homeschool. I can't think of a better reason if you're actually terrified for something that's extraordinarily rare and the odds of it happening in New Milford are way lower than lottery ticket odds, way lower than your odds of hitting the Powerball jackpot, right? But if you want to be absolutely sure you're not gonna have to worry about some crazed gunman going into the school, get the school out of the picture. Homeschool your kids. I cannot think of a better reason to do that. Prescription number 2, send your kids to private schools, apply for grants and scholarships. Private schools in Connecticut are not like private schools in the rest of the country. And the rest of the country, nobody pays full tuition, room, and board. Everybody gets a gigantic scholarship or grant, which all of these private schools have internally. All of these private schools have internal grant making and scholarship programs within their school. And by the way, sending your kids to a private school, according to the Cato Institute, you're way more likely to get shot. Your kids are way more likely to get shot in public school than they are in private school. 6% of school shootings happen in private school. 94% of them happen in public school. And we can go on and get some context from that. Since there are many more public schools than private schools, we must consider that difference. The most recent data from the National Center for Educational Statistics shows that around 25% of U.S. K-12 schools are private, while about 10% of school children attend private schools. In other words, the data suggests that children that go to private schools are disproportionately less likely to experience a school shooting than children in public schools. So yeah, get your kids into private schools, homeschool, homeschool, homeschool. The main lesson from these first 2 prescriptions is prescription 3, get your kids out of public schools. Public schooling is not a panacea of education. There are many other ways to learn something than within the 4 walls of a public school. But prescription number 4, I can't think of a better and more clear reason for vouchers. If you're going to have kids be homeschooled, then one of the ways you can afford to do that is with a voucher. If you're going to send your kid to private school because of your fear of these type of school shootings, you should be in support of vouchers. Policy prescription number 5, which it's a shame that this is the case, but you have to institutionalize it, those that can't be part of a civilization. In order to be part of a civilization, you have to be civilized. In order to be civilized, you have to act in a civil manner. And if you've demonstrated that you cannot act in a civil manner, off you go. Off you go. It's not politically correct to say so, but I'm okay. I don't like it, but I'm okay with mandatory institutionalization of those that are severely mentally deranged, like all of these shooters. We do this with our criminals already. You send them off to prison. If they break the law and demonstrate that they can't act in a civilized manner in our civilization, then they go away. If they're an illegal immigrant, then we deport them. If they're an active shooter, then we send them off to heaven and let God sort them out, right? And maybe in an active shooter situation, it's not the goal to shoot them in the face. If it's ridiculous, if they completely surrender, then yeah, I'll rearrest them. But if they're going to be shooting at you, then yes, shoot them back. You have to remove those people that cannot be part of civilization from that civilization. We have to have this sort of institutionalization. And if we're just talking about the severely mentally unwell, then yeah, we're not going to necessarily send them to prison just for being severely mentally unwell. Maybe we send them, to an asylum of some sort. But we have to do that. And when it comes to criminals, right, when it comes to gang wars, which is where the overwhelming majority of these school shootings are happening and where the overwhelming majority of the deaths related to these school shootings are happening. When it comes to gang wars, when it comes to inner city Chicago, these people, when you arrest them, you can't put them back out on the street because they're just going to run to the protection of the gang and not show up for court. And the gang's going to give them protection and you're never going to get them back until they commit another homicide. So when you send these people, when you arrest these people, you can't put them back on the street. No bail, right? When you have infinite number of witnesses, when you catch them red-handed, when you have video surveillance, when you have undeniable evidence that they did it, then it's at least life in prison, and you don't give them the opportunity. And this is a conversation I had today with someone. If we're talking about sending somebody to prison, then we should be talking about sending somebody to prison for decades. If you're not willing to send somebody to prison for decades, maybe the thing shouldn't be illegal, right? Like if we're talking about just smoking a little weed, right? If we're talking about some 17-year-old streaking across the girls' field hockey field, right? These aren't things you should be sending people to prison for at all. Maybe the kid who streaked across the girls' lacrosse field or whatever, yeah, he gets a fine and some community service, maybe, right? But if you're not willing to send, if you're willing to send somebody to prison, then you're probably going to have to send them to prison for decades because the recidivism rate with this sort of thing is insane, right? And telling people that they can't legally buy guns because red flag, right? The red flag shouldn't be you're not allowed to legally buy guns. But if there is a reason to red flag somebody, then off to the institution. This kid should have definitely been institutionalized, and that's the thing that's going to prevent him from getting his hand on a gun. That's the thing that's going to prevent him 24-hour monitoring behind concrete walls. That's the thing that's going to prevent these sort of situations. Because my response, again, if you're going to just make all the guns illegal, if you're going to make all the ammo illegal, he's just going to buy it illegally. This kid is definitely just going to buy it illegally. He went to extraordinary lengths to get his hands on these guns. He talked to family members to try to get them to buy it for him, and they wouldn't. He talked to friends to get them to buy it for him, and they wouldn't. And he had to go find some out of town gun shop that would actually sell to him that didn't know this kid. Prescription number 6. So yeah, number 5, institutionalize that cannot be part of civilization. I know it sucks. I wish there was a better solution, but that we have to do it. Number 6, don't live in third world cities. Again, we're in New Milford, Connecticut. This is probably not going to be an issue for us. It's these third world cities that I spent some time living in, right? Where virtually all of these shootings take place. Not just school shootings, not just mass shootings, but all of the shootings in general. All of the homicide, virtually all of it takes place in these isolated pockets of West Baltimore, East St. Louis, the wrong side of the river in New Orleans. I lived in Savannah on the wrong side of the tracks. That's where virtually all of these homicides are taking place, no matter what type of weapon is being used in these homicides. So step 6, in terms of policy, don't live in these third world cities. Find a way to get out of these cities. 7, allow schools to subjectively make severe penalties when they need to. And this is why we have to be careful of social emotional learning, because one of the prescriptions of social emotional learning is to not say, whoa, this kid's a problem, out he goes. It's to say, now, wait a minute, maybe he can be reformed. So be very, very careful. I'm not saying we should get rid of it, but I think we should keep an extremely watchful eye on the SEL policies that are coming through. Number 8, of course, is after you've gotten all of that done, yes, eliminate the soft targets. I have it on good account here in New Milford. I have it on good account that New Milford Public Schools already has armed security at every school, trained for exactly these purposes. I have it on good account that there's more than one at New Milford High School. And I have it on good account that there are a lot more on the way starting July 1st because you guys voted at referendum in favor of including those policy changes, in the budget. So we've actually budgeted more armed school security officers, ASSOs, for this coming year. And budgetarily, that begins July 1st. So by the time these kids go back in school at the end of August, there will be more armed school security officers in these buildings. And yes, these doors are on lockdown during the day. You can't get in unless you are buzzed into these schools. That doesn't mean they're locked from both directions. It just means that you can't get into the school unless you're buzzed in. In the case of Uvalde, the reason the kid was able to get into the school is because apparently some teacher left the door propped open. Now, I'm not going to reveal too much more about things like strategy and stuff like that when it comes to the security officers. All I'm going to say is, yes, they're there. Here in New Milford, they're there. So you can rest assured that there are at least some people in these, some armed security officers in these buildings, and that there are more coming on the way. I'm not going to say more than about this than that, and thus potentially reveal security strategies and secrets. But just know that they're there, and that all the doors are locked from the outside, and that they're there despite Chris Murphy's best efforts. Yes, I've been getting your messages. And yes, it is Chris Murphy who has on his own page, this is still up on his own page, Senator Murphy helps introduce legislation to remove officers from schools July 30th, 2020. A push at the federal level would remove police from schools, and a senator from Connecticut joined the charge. We don't need any more information than that, because I guess policy prescription 8B would be don't ever vote to send a Democrat to DC again. And by the way, when it comes to like, people are saying we shouldn't treat schools like prisons. Well, either schools are war zones and should be treated as such, or they're not. And then we can stop talking about this whole thing and stop making demands to destroy the entire Second Amendment, which is there as a way to protect the right to self-defense. It's there to say that you are allowed to defend life, liberty, property, the pursuit of happiness. You are there to, it is there to ensure that you have the ways and means to self-preservation. And the last two things we'll close with is number 9, do not ever fall into the trap of the plane crash effect. We talked about that. And number 10, never legislate unreactionary politics. Okay, so that closes things. On my YouTube channel, we are going to go over the Buffalo Shooter Manifesto, which I probably should not have said out loud. So let's go into your comments before we get any further. I see Paul Murphy's watching. Thanks, Paul, for watching. On YouTube, I don't see any commentary. So, folks, again, thanks for tuning in. I have got to go. We're going to kill the stream on Facebook, and then we're going to take a brief intermission. And then, where is it? We're going to take a brief intermission, and we'll be back to talk about said manifesto. So, for folks on Facebook, thanks for tuning in. Link is in this video's description to join in on YouTube, and we'll see you in a moment. Okay, YouTube crowd. Let's see who's here. All right. All right, YouTube crowd, we are back. So, part of why I left is because I had to piss like a racehorse. So, thanks for tuning in, everybody. And we're going to get into the second half, and then we're probably going to get kicked. We're probably going to get kicked. I actually can't share the link to all of this, but there's a clear reason that I'm doing all this. Let me put this in here. All right. This document is 180 something pages long. It's just taking a minute to load up the PDF. For those who don't know, I actually have skimmed over some of this. 180 pages on the dot. All right. And this is the fella from Buffalo who shot up that convenience store. Actually, no, it's a supermarket. I'm probably going to regret this because YouTube is probably going to have its bots hear me read language that is overtly racist because this guy was. And there's going to be some topics in here we can't discuss. And, if you want to find this manifesto, you'll see in a minute that there will be some information at the top of your screen about all of that. And that's really all I can say about all of this. The other thing I'm going to add is the reason we're going over this is because his motivations are going to give us some insight as to what motivates these type of shooters and what motivates these type of deranged lunatics. And for the record, I'm sure you've all heard the myth, and it is absolutely a myth, right? Like, I'm sure we're going to get Vosh who's going to come on and say, well, I have a study that says 2 is greater than 3. I have a study that says, bachelors can be married. I have a study that says your name isn't Mike Sennello. I have a study that says, right? So I'm sure you've heard the claim that there isn't any such thing as left-wing terrorism and that it's all right-wing terrorism. And this is going to get labeled as a right-wing terrorist attack. A right-wing extremism at least. A right-wing radicalism at least. And it's not. Now, this guy is it is possible to profess a politic that is not in line with your actual politic. And the thing is that if you say that you're right-wing or you're left-wing or you're in favor of Democrat policies or whatever, we can look to your behavior and your underlying philosophy to derive what your actual politic is, which is what we're going to have to do with this guy because he claims to be one thing and claims to be another and claims to not be one thing and claims to not be another. And it's kind of all over the place. So in order for us to determine his politic, we're actually going to have to extrapolate it. Now, the other thing is that this is not really all that well written. It's not really all that well organized. And it reads almost exactly like Mein Kampf. So before we get started, yes, Hitler was a socialist. And T-I-K has a channel on YouTube right now, and he has a 4-hour-long video with hundreds and hundreds of literary citations to show you exactly what he's talking about when he proves the case undeniably that Hitler was a socialist, that Hitler was instituting what he was doing from a left-wing world perspective. So it's possible to get to a racist point of view from a leftist perspective, which is exactly what critical race theory actually is. Right? It's just racism for leftist. It's just left-wing racism, right? And I think this is a perfect example of how that comes to fruition. Now, I've only glanced over it, so maybe my glance over is going to reveal that this actually is a right-wing situation. But it's not clear to me that that's the case at all, at least from the glance over. So we're going to dive into the whole thing. So folks, if you have any questions or comments, please let me know in the chat. And, again, the reason I'm doing this is because there's been a narrative. There's been a clear narrative that just is false. And you can see at the top of the screen. You can see at the top of the screen in sort of bluish background where you can find this manifesto. I probably should be bleeping myself when I say Buffalo. Yeah. But anyways, let's dive into this whole thing. I don't know that I want to give this guy any more attention, so I don't know if I'm going to mention his name if I read it. But this dude says, what you need to know. By the way, this guy I think was like 18 or 19 when this happened. What you need to know. If there's one thing I want you to get from these writings, it's that white birth rates must change. Every day, the white population becomes fewer in number. To maintain a population, the people must achieve a birth rate that reaches replacement fertility levels in the Western world that is about 2.06 births per woman. And he lists a source for that. The only white country that achieves these levels is Argentina at 2.247. Now, again, what is white? Well, a leftist worldview would say that there's a bunch of cultural factors that come along, and behavioral elements that come along with your skin color. And the MLK version of black and white was literally just, the Family Guy chart, right? With, Wesley Snipes at one end, right? And, some Irish fella at the top, at the other end of that spectrum. And that's what it's been. Yes, the left is the folks on the left who say that race is basically made up arbitrariness. There is some credibility. There's some credence to that claim. So the question is, what is white? The other thing I want folks to keep in mind is every time we read the word white, replace it with black, and explain to me how this doesn't fit perfectly into the left-wing black nationalist narrative. But not in Europe, not in the rest of the Americas, not in Australia or New Zealand. White people are failing to reproduce, failing to create families, failing to have children. But despite the sub-replacement fertility rate, the population in the West is increasing rapidly. How is this possible? Mass immigration and the higher fertility rates of the immigrants themselves are causing this increase in population. Now, this is true. All of this is true. Why should we care? I mean, there's a million reasons to care about mass immigration. Why should we care as it relates to what he's trying to say? We are experiencing an invasion on a level never seen before in history. Millions of people pouring across our borders legally, invited by the state and corporate entities to replace the white people who have failed to reproduce, failed to create the cheap labor, failed to create new consumers and tax base that the corporations and states need to have to thrive. All right, let's replace some of these words, right? Mass immigration of Europeans into North America in 1640 and the higher fertility rate of these immigrant Europeans themselves are causing this increase in population in North America in 1640. We are experiencing an invasion on a level never seen before in history. Millions of people pouring across our borders legally, invited by the state and corporate entities to replace the Native American people who have failed to reproduce, failed to create the cheap labor, failed to create the new consumers and tax base that the corporations and states need to have to thrive. So again, this isn't necessarily right-wing. The crisis of mass immigration and sub-replacement fertility is an assault on the European people that, if not combated, will ultimately result in the complete racial and cultural replacement of the European people. It's not untrue. But why do we care? Why are we focused on this? And again, all they do is replace the crisis of mass immigration and sub-replacement fertility is an assault on let's pick another topic. The crisis of adhering to the rules of English is an assault on the trans people that, if not combated, will ultimately result in the complete replacement of trans people. Right? Do you see how this isn't necessarily right wing? This could easily be framed from the other way. To see this in full effect, you only have to look at the population statistics in Western nations for the year 2050, list of countries by future population, UN median fertility variant. In 2050, despite the ongoing effect of sub-replacement fertility, the population figures show that population, let's zoom in. Let's zoom in so you guys can see this. Does not decrease in line with the sub-replacement fertility levels, but actually maintains and in many white nations rapidly increases, all through immigration. This is ethnic replacement, this is cultural replacement, this is racial replacement. This is white genocide. Again, if you take the MLK definition of race and racism, none of this is true. What you have to do is you have to take the modern day interpretation of race, which includes ethnicity, which includes culture, and which, if we're talking about just there being more, right? If we're talking about, we're an oppressed minority, we don't want to become an oppressed minority, that's genocide. You're a genocide. You're a genocidist because we're an oppressed minority. All through, we have the libertarians in New Hampshire have the Free State Project. How do you think Democrats would describe the Free State Project? How do you think they would describe it? How do you think the most radical left-winger would describe that? How do you think the trans movement would describe things like people saying the way that you're using language, the way you're using pronouns, the way that you're describing the biology of all of this is just factually incorrect. They would describe it as genocide. Vosh is doing this right now. Vosh just did this a few days ago and then advocated for actual murder. Actual murder, said it explicitly, was an explicit call to action to shoot and kill Republicans and suspected Republicans and suspected right-wingers, right? Who he's labeling as fascists because, again, we can say this is white genocide, but this is trans genocide by the fascists, right? The fascists are growing in numbers, and the fascists are replacing the liberal order of things. This is something you would expect to hear if we were to just change a few of the nouns to different types of people, right? If we were to just replace the words with things that mean just a different version of that thing, but the same concept in general, we would get to Vosh's position right now. And he was the one saying, this is violence, right? Words are violence. Remember that? Who's the one that's saying words are violence? And that silence is now violence. To return to replacement fertility levels is priority number one, but it is no simple task. There are myriad of reasons behind the decline in fertility rates and the destruction of the traditional family unit. We must inevitably correct the disaster of hedonistic, nihilistic individualism. Okay. We're explicitly not right-wing here now. We must inevitably correct the disaster of adjectives, individualism. He's against individualism. You can't possibly get more not right-wing. Yes, he couches that with the hedonistic individualism and nihilistic individualism. There's a difference between hyper self-interest and self-centeredness and conceit and just generic individualism, which is that we prioritize the individual over the community. That's what individualism means. That human beings as individuals have agencies. Therefore, we have to value the human being as an individual, not as a collective. But watch how he's describing this. He's describing the value judgment that would be ascribed to a collective. But it will take some time we do not have due to the crisis of mass immigration. Due to mass immigration, we lack the time scale required to enact the civilizational paradigm shift we need to undertake to return to healthy prosperity. Get rid of due to mass immigration. Who does this sound like? We lack the time scale required to enact the civilizational paradigm shift we need to undertake to return to health and prosperity. This is Vosh. This is straight out of Vosh's mouth. This is straight out of Vosh's mouth. This is straight out of Xander Hall's mouth. Well, maybe not as much Xander Hall, but straight out of the tanky's mouth. Mass immigration will disenfranchise us. Oh my God. Oh my God. What's the term that the leftists made up for when rich people move into a community? Let me know in the comments, chat. I'm forgetting this word. This word is just eluding me. But let's use that instead. Oh God, what's it called? Gentrification will disenfranchise us, subvert our nations, destroy our communities, destroy our ethnic ties, destroy our cultures, destroy our peoples. Oh my God, I could just use capitalism. Capitalism will disenfranchise us, subvert our nations, destroy our communities, destroy our ethnic ties, destroy our cultures, destroy our peoples. Oh my God, I'm just going to use capitalism now. We must inevitably correct the disaster of hedonistic, nihilistic individualism, which is invariably linked to capitalism. So hedonistic, nihilistic capitalism. But it will take some time we do not have due to the crisis of capitalism. Due to capitalism, we lack the time scale required to enact the civilizational paradigm shift Due to institutional racism, we lack the time scale required to enact civilizational paradigm. Do you see what I'm saying here, folks? The second half of this doesn't come from the worldview of, say, the right wing. Thus, before we deal with fertility rates, before we deal with gentrification, before we deal with capitalism, before we deal with systemic racism, we must deal with both the invaders within our lands. We must deal with the colonizers and in our lands, and the colonizers that seek to enter our society. I should just go ahead and repost this whole thing with leftist language. It wouldn't take much. Translate these words into leftist language. They mean the same thing. We must crush immigration and deport those invaders already living on our soil. It is not just a matter of our prosperity, but the very survival of our people. This is what Vosh is saying right now. He's saying this right now about fascists, which are just people he disagrees with. About me, my name is, and I was born on, which makes me 18 years old as of writing this. I am the sole perpetrator of the recent attempted mass shooting. He wrote this right before he did this. I live in Southern Tier, I've lived in Southern Tier, New York all my life with both my parents and two brothers. That's like Binghamton, New York area, from Oneonta to Elmira. You guys can look that up on Google Maps if you care to. I believe I am ethnically white since my parents' nationalities are from Northwestern Europe and Italy. I believe I am I believe I am a cultural person of color since my parents are, we wouldn't go to nationality. We would go to the ethos of what we define as person of color, what the left defines as person of color now, right? If you don't vote for Democrats, you ain't black, right? So we just use those words instead. I graduated high school with a Regents diploma. Regents diploma is a high school degree based on testing that exists only in New York. With advanced designation, and am currently enrolled at SUNY Broome, which used to be Broome Community College in Binghamton, New York, with a major in engineering science. I would love to continue this, but there are bigger problems I'm more concerned with. I am not a war fighter, whatever that means, nor have I been enrolled in any military. Oh, okay, he's using war fighter to mean somebody who is in the military in any way. Nor am I enrolled in any military or tactical training, so excuse any mistakes I make during my attack. Jesus. I was never diagnosed with a mental disability or disorder, but you are clearly deranged, and I believe to be perfectly sane. Okay, so this is somebody who's genuinely evil then. If he is actually rationalizing this final solution, if he's actually coming to this conclusion through reason and through rational means, then we're talking about somebody who's just truly evil. I recently took an MBTI test, which is a personality test, as seen below. Introverted, somewhere between intuitive and observant. Super thinking, super introverted, super intuitive, super judging, and super turbulent. So this is something along the lines of like these INTJ nonsense. And my most recent self pictures are below. These are stock photos. These aren't actually him. The truth is my personal life and experiences are of no value. I am simply a white man I am simply a person of color seeking to protect and serve my community, my people, and my culture and my race. Right? And democracy and my anti-fascism and my anti-capitalism. Questions and answers. Why did you decide to carry out the attack? To show to the replacers, to show to the capitalists, to show to the fascists that as long as the white man lives, that as long as there are anti-fascists, our land, our society will never be theirs and they will never be safe from us. To directly reduce immigration rates to European lands by intimidating and physically removing the replacers themselves. Just convert this to colonizers, and you've got Vosh this weekend, like word for word Vosh this weekend. And yes, this also sounds exactly like Mein Kampf. Now, I haven't read the whole book all the way through, and it's true that if I'm going to read it, I know enough German, I should be reading the original German. However, finding Mein Kampf in the original German is insanely hard to do, and unfortunately, because of that, because the Germans have basically book burned the original German versions of this book, we only have one English translation. There's only been one person's translation into English that we can rely on. And that makes it tough to determine if that's the appropriate translation to use. Right? But this is reading exactly like that translation. And again, I haven't read it all the way through. I've read huge chunks of it, huge excerpts of it. And yeah, the writing itself is like really bad writing, kind of like this. And also not bad in terms of like evil. It's just not good writing. It's just poor from a literary standpoint. It's just poor literature. To intimidate the colonizers, the replacers already living in our lands, to emigrate back to their home countries, to agitate the political enemies of my people into action, to cause them to overextend their own hand and experience the eventual and inevitable backlash as a result, to incite violence, retaliation, and further divide between the European people and the replacers currently occupying European soil. Currently occupying indigenous soil. To further divide between the indigenous people and the colonizers currently occupying indigenous soil. Lauren Southern, eat your heart out. To show the effect of direct action, lighting a path forward for those that wish to follow. A path for those that wish to free their ancestors' land from the replacers' grasp, there should be an apostrophe there, and to be a beacon for those that wish to create a lasting culture, to tell them they are not alone. To create an atmosphere of fear and change in which drastic, powerful, and revolutionary action can occur, straight out of Karl Marx's mouth. To add momentum to the pendulum swings of history, further destabilizing and polarizing Western society in order to eventually destroy current nihilistic, hedonistic, individualistic insanity that is taking control of Western thought. Most of all, it was to spread awareness to my fellow whites, to my fellow anti-capitalists, to my fellow comrades about the real problems that the West is facing, and to encourage further attacks that will eventually start the war. This is just Bolshevism. That start the war that will save the Western world, save the white race, and allow for humanity to progress into more advanced civilizations. Okay, none of this is right wing. The entire ethos and spirit of the right wing, if we're going to even just go back to the literal version of it, right, which is that it was, the people that sat to the right of the throne in France, right? That's where the left-right divide comes, right? And those people were looking to preserve the existing traditions, the existing customs, the existing order of things, and to prevent this type of violent overthrow, to prevent revolution, to be against anarchism, to be for order, law and order. This is an overt rejection of the fundamental things that define the entirety of the ethos and spirit of right wing. So again, a huge part of why I'm reading this is so that you guys understand that this is in no way right wing. Now, it doesn't necessarily, I have to say, it doesn't necessarily go perfectly lockstep in line with like left wing, but all it is just taking anti-capitalist, anti-fascist, quote, air quotes, rhetoric, and just replacing all the things they say about people of color, which is white people. That's all they're doing. Which again is just taking Mein Kampf and saying replacing Jews with, white people, and replacing Aryan race with, in the case of the anti-fascists, with people of color, right? It's just straight up Mein Kampf with different races. With, instead of being anti-Jew and pro-Aryan, it's in his case, in the shooter's case, anti-POC, if you will, anti-non-European, and pro-European. I guess is how he's defining white, right? Like, I'm not so sure if he includes Sicilian in all this. I don't know where his line is drawn. I don't know how you consider if he's a drop of blooder, like in the sense of like Well, if you're Sicilian, you really got some North African blood in you almost certainly. Even Southern Spaniards have, definitely have some Arabic blood in their system. So are we one drop of blooder? And if that's the case, then I don't know where you're going to find somebody who isn't a one drop of blood other than like Northern Ireland, Northern Scotland, and like rural, extreme Northern Scandinavian countries. So maybe he's a one drop of blooder. But again, the reason I'm doing this, the reason I'm going through this with everybody is to show undeniably, this is not the right wing. And that you can get to racism like this directly through the means of the policy prescriptions and the philosophy of the left wing going on right now. I mean, again, this reads just like Vosh, except replace, people of color with white people, right? Replace immigrants with capitalism. And you've got Vosh, word for word. You've got the Vosh Google Doc. What do you want? We must ensure the existence of our people and a future for white children. We must ensure the existence of people of color and a future for people of color's children. Although they reject the family unit. So, yes, I guess it would be, I don't even know if it would be the state. It would be whatever Big Brother is to the left wing. Who do you represent? Millions of European and other ethno-nationalist peoples that wish to live in peace amongst their own people, living in their own land. This is Nick Fuentes. Practicing their own traditions and deciding the future of their own kind. Are you part of any political group or movement? I am not a direct member of any organization or group, though I support many. It actually seems like you would vote Democrat, though it's unclear exactly who he would vote for and why you would vote for those people. Did the groups you support are aligned with order or promote your attack? No, I am the sole perpetrator of this attack. I've had many influences from others, but it was only me who decided to continue to do this. Do these groups hold power? Do these groups hold power? Who are the people in these groups? The total number of people in these organizations is in the millions. The total number of groups in the thousands. I have no idea what he's getting at here with this. People from every walk of life and every place of employment and field, but disproportionately employed in military services and public service occupations. Unsurprisingly, ethno-nationalists, like black nationalists and nationalists, seek employment in areas that serve their nations and community. Where did you get your current beliefs? Mostly from the internet. Well, he's a teenager, so he's going to get everything in terms of his beliefs from the internet, just like all of Vosh's cult following. There was little to no influence on my personal beliefs by people I met in person. So he's terminally online, Vosh. I read multiple sources of information from all ideologies and decided that my current one is most correct. Did you carry out the attack for fame? I carried this attack out so I can influence others into defending themselves from their replacers. Becoming infamous was the only way. Okay, so this is somebody who has said that there's all of this politic, like they're committing a genocide against us, right? They're irredeemably evil. Systemic racism is baked into the thing, right? This is the exact rhetoric. Folks like Vosh on the left have been using, and this is obviously the response when you go to these extreme levels, right? When you take things to their logical end, this is where you end up. This is the exact thing that Vosh has been railing against when it comes to his claims of stochastic terrorism, right? The logical end for his claims is this, except anti-fascism. This is why Antifa is so unbelievably violent, because when you take their claims, when you take their philosophy to its logical end, which is what they're doing, when you say things like ICE is creating ICE and Border Patrol are creating concentration camps. These are just concentration camps. When AOC uses that rhetoric, then when a guy goes to blow up an ICE facility outside Portland, that's the obvious conclusion to take from all of that. Now, that is an incitement. But if you're going to say that stochastic terrorism exists, that's what it looks like. And again, you can get that from the left wing. Why did you target those people? They are an obvious, visible, and large group of replacers. They are an obvious, visible, and large group of colonizers from a culture with higher fertility rates and strong, robust traditions that seek to occupy my people's lands and ethnically replace my own people. It would have eased me if I knew all the blacks I would be killing were criminals or future criminals, but then I realized all black people are replacers just by existing in the white countries. We could mirror this. They are an obvious, visible, and large group of colonizers. From a culture with higher fertility rates and a strong, robust traditions, such as punctuality, that seek to occupy my people of color's lands, indigenous lands, and ethnically cleanse this society. Ethnically cleanse people of color. It would have eased me if I knew all the whites I would be killing were criminals or future criminals, but then I realized all whites are just colonizers by existing in POC countries. Right? Do you see how we can easily just make this go the other way? Over what time span did you plan the attack? I've been passively preparing for this attack like every American does by buying ammo, surplus military gear, and shooting irregularly for a few years. It wasn't until the beginning of January 2022 that I actually got serious. Why did you choose this particular moment in time to attack? The best time to attack was yesterday. The next best time is today. Again, this sounds just like Antifa rhetoric. Every day that goes by without an attack, hundreds of more non-whites immigrate to white countries and spawn children and spawn capitalism. Waiting any longer will only make it more difficult to get POCs out later on. Why did you choose firearms? Because they work. Why did you choose Molotov cocktails? Because they work. There are very few weapons that are easier to use and more effective at killing than firearms, especially the Bushmaster XM15 I'll be using, which is very similar in build to the AR-15. The effect it would have on social discourse, the extra media coverage they would provide, and the changes to gun laws that will be pushed will all help my case. Okay, so media, you guys pushing this anti-AR-15 narrative is exactly what he's saying. He's saying you guys giving this we went over this earlier in the show, right? You guys giving undue attention, undeserved, unearned attention to the AR-15 build is why he went with the AR-15. You guys saying ban the AR-15 is why he went with the AR-15. He's saying it explicitly. Chris Murphy making sitting politicians making a big deal about the AR-15. Oh, he's saying it in this document. That's why I chose what's effectively an AR-15. It's really, really close to an AR-15 build. That's why he went for this. So remember what I said earlier about stop giving these guys the attention? Like, go to the actual data. Handguns are what causes handguns are the account for the overwhelming majority of these incidences and the deaths that result therefrom. Not the AR-15. You don't need to make this boogeyman out of the AR-15. And by making a boogeyman out of the AR-15, you inspired him to use one. The effect it would have on social discourse, the extra media coverage they would provide, and the changes to gun laws that will be pushed will all help my case. And I'll explain what he means by changes to gun laws. Why did you choose redacted for the place of attack? Redacted has the highest black population percentage, zip code redacted, and isn't that far away. Plus, and this is really important, remember that gun control conversation we had earlier. New York has heavy gun laws, so it would ease me if I knew that any legally armed civilian was limited to 10-round magazines or cocked firearms. Get rid of soft targets. Remember what I said about the overwhelming majority of firearms used in either self-defense or in attack situations are used in defense. Which actually partially explains why, as number of firearms goes up, violence rates and gun violent rates go down. right? He's explaining this right here. The reason he picked this target was because it was a soft target. I replaced the name of the city to redacted because I'd prefer that the FBI and local police don't know until the attack has started. After the attack, can somebody switch it over, please? And they didn't. Good. Do you consider the attack an act of terrorism? By definition, yes. But I believe it is a partisan action against an occupying force. Partisan in this case meaning the military partisan, which is a little bit different from like a political partisan. Do you feel any remorse for the attack? I don't know. I haven't done it yet, stupid. But if I were to guess, it would be yes. Did or do you personally hate blacks? A black man or woman living in their homelands? No. A black man or woman choosing to invade our lands, live in our soil, live on government support, and attack and replace our people? Yes, I dislike them. This I don't know how you categorize this as not white nationalism or some form of white supremacy. So those that have been saying white nationalism, white supremacy, maybe there's a pathway to this not being the case, but it is that. The only people I truly hate are the converts, those from our own people that turn their backs on their heritage, which is their race, which is exactly what the left wing is saying right now. That your identity includes your race. You are a person of color. Therefore, all of these prescriptions all of these things you should be doing because of your race. Turned their backs on their traditions and became blood traitors to their own race. They became Uncle Toms. They are not completely hopeless, however. I believe some can come back. So it's important to welcome them when they are awoken instead of shaming and ostracizing them. This sounds exactly how the left treats Larry Elder. This sounds exactly how the left treats Thomas Sowell. This sounds exactly how the left treats all of those. Oh God, who's the guy that's running for Senate in Georgia? It was a former football player, running back, Herschel Walker. Right? I think it's Herschel Walker. Herschel Walker. This is exactly how the left wing are treating him. Did you or do you personally hate foreigners or other cultures? No. Many people and their cultures are great, but it's important to note that they can only stay great if they are separated from each other. This is white nationalism. This is race, insert race nationalism. Do you believe those you attacked were innocent? There is no non-white living on white lands that is innocent. That is race nationalism. There is no white man living on indigenous lands that is innocent. Did you intend to survive the attack? Yes, but death is a definite possibility. These situations are chaotic and virtually impossible to control no matter the planning. Survival was a better alternative to death in order to further spread my ideals by media coverage and to deplete resources from the state by my own imprisonment. Was the attack anti-immigration in origin? Was the attack anti-fascist, Antifa in origin? Yes, beyond all doubt, Antifa, anti-colonization replacement, and anti-cultural replacement. Was the attack anti-diversity in origin? No, the attack was not an attack on diversity, but an attack in the name of diversity. So this is actually reading explicitly like the intersectionalist crowd. No, the attack was not an attack on diversity, but an attack in the name of diversity. This is why Richard Spencer voted Democrat. This is why intersectionality, this is why the critical version of race theory, the critical race theory, right? This is why all of the modern leftism is overtly racist. And this is right here. It's right here. To ensure that peoples of the world remain true to their traditions and faiths and do not become watered down and corrupted by the influence of outsiders, they must be separate. This is exactly what Marx believed. The attack was to ensure a preservation of beauty, art, and tradition. Like right out of Marx's mouth. In my mind, a rainbow is only beautiful due to its variety of colors. Mix the colors together and you'll destroy them all, and they are gone forever, and the end result is far from anything beautiful. Do you intend to kill police officers or other enforcers of the state? No, although modern police officers exist to serve the quote-unquote elite, many of them are of decent character, and it would make me very upset if I killed one, but only you know if I did. If you survived, did you intend to go to trial? Yes, and to plead guilty. Damn. So he is actually evil. He knows what he's doing. He knows what he's doing in this case. Are you a Christian? No. I do not ask God for salvation by faith, nor do I confess my sins to him. I personally believe there is no afterlife. I do, however, believe in and practice many Christian values. Are you a fascist? Yes. Fascism is one of the only political ideologies that will unite whites against the replacers. Since that is what I seek, calling me a fascist would be accurate. Kind of, but only if we're going to read this from a very literal interpretation of Mein Kampf, which is left-wing in origin. Are you a white supremacist? Are you a black supremacist? Yes, I would call myself a white or black supremacist. After all, which race is responsible for the world we live in today? We was Kangs. I believe the white race is superior in the brain to other races. So here we have it. He is actually a white supremacist. Undeniably so. Are you racist? Yes, I am racist because I believe in differences in capabilities between races. The difference between him and the left-wing races is that they are in denial of this claim. Right? The left-wing racists, that the intersectionalists, the ones that say white people are all inherently racist because they're racist, because they're white, those people are racist, but they're in denial. Are you intolerant? Sure. The last virtues of a dying nation are tolerance and apathy, and I want none of it. Are you an anti-Semite? Yes. Jesus. I wish all Jews to go to hell. Go back to hell where you came from, demon. So in this case, he's the racist that believes Jews are not white. Again, does this sound left-wing or right-wing? But in reality, a Jew confined to Judea where he can't spread his people or beliefs is of no concern to me. It's important to note that with proper connection to the internet, that is impossible. So yes, he is perfectly in line with Palestine and the Palestinian movement to vaporize the Jews. Genocide the Jews is what he's calling for. Just like Palestine. Just like most of the Arab world. Are you a neo-Nazi? I support neo-Nazism, but I am not a member of any neo-Nazi groups. You decide what that makes me. That makes you a Nazi. Nazism is an idea. Right? It's become not just a party. It's become an idea. Are you a conservative? No. Conservatism is corporatism in disguise. I want no part of it. So again, not a Republican, not a conservative, not right-wing. And this, I'm not only taking him at his word, we can derive that from the positions he's taken. Are you a homophobe, anti-alphabet soup, which is P-LGBTQ? I believe that problems involving the P-LGB, drop the T, are very insignificant if one is actually part of the LGB or LGB group and they are loyal to their people. That is fine with me. Transgenderism, however, is a mental illness and should be addressed as such. So this seems like a complete aside from the rest of the manifesto. Are you right-wing, depending on the definition? Sure. Are you left-wing, depending on the definition? Sure. We can extrapolate from what he's already said that there's no way to get right-wing out of this. Unless you want in 1984 the word right-wing to mean something it never meant. Are you a socialist? Depending on the definition. Worker ownership of the means of production? ? It depends on who those workers are, their intentions, who currently owns the means of production, their intentions, and who currently owns the state and their intentions. So, yeah, he's totally in favor of socialism as long as it's white socialism. He's totally in favor of socialism as long as it's Aryan socialism. Hitler was a socialist. And so, apparently, is this guy. Because again, he's treating things from a purely collectivist lens. He's treating everything through the lens of collectivism. He rejects individualism, just like Hitler did, and just like Marx did when he basically provided the modern definition of what it means to be a socialist. By living in the United States, weren't you an immigrant yourself? Yeah, I mean, this whole white nationalism and Race nationalism is just stupid and insane, of course, but weren't you an immigrant yourself? Yes, it seems we immigrants seem to bring a whole host of issues. Although the land technically belongs to its native people, the United States now belongs to whites because removing whites from all of the United States is impossible. They are simply rooted too deeply into the land. This is intersectionalism. This is the internal contradiction of intersectionalism, like word for word. The same thing applies with other white countries that are not in Europe. Again, this is. I told you he was all over the place. And this is part of the all over the place and the internal contradictions that are identical to the same internal contradictions and all over the placeness of intersectionality and the racism that undergirds that. Is there a particular person that radicalized you the most? Yes, and his name is. This guy's live stream started everything you see here. This guy started my real research into the problems with immigration and foreigners in our white lands. Without his live stream, I would likely have no idea about the real problems the West is facing. I told you I only glanced over this. Let's type this guy's name into DuckDuckGo. A muck wiki. There's an Australian who shot and killed 51 people. Oh, he's the Christchurch shooter. I didn't know he had a live stream. I didn't know he was a. Oh, because he live streamed his shooting. Oh, because he had that one live stream. Yeah, okay. Were you taught violence and extremism by video games, music, literature, cinema? No, only the truth caused me. Jesus. Oh boy. I'm going to get clipped out of context. If this video gets yeeted, it's going to be because of this. It's going to be because somebody's going to take something out of context. Either the bots or the people, the NPCs who might as well be bots. Did you always hold these views? When I was 12, I was deep into communist ideology. Talk to anyone from my old high school and ask about me and you'll hear that. From age 15 to 18, however, I consistently moved further to the right. Okay, remember, he's deep into communist ideology. Deep into communist ideology. I moved further to the right. So he moved further to the right of deep into communist ideology, which means he moved further to the right of Mao. He's more right-wing than Mao. That doesn't make him right-wing to be right of Mao. Right? I realize that the left wing, the terminally online Overton window of the left wing right now is pathetically small and somehow off the deep end beyond Mao, right? Beyond Mao, somehow. But being right of Mao does not make you right-wing at all. So I'm sure you guys have seen this, and I should clip this. But this is not evidence that he's right-wing. This is evidence that he's right-wing of deep into communist ideology, which I know for Vosh means he's a fascist. By virtue of being right of Mao, you're a right-wing fascist radical that, according to Vosh this weekend, means that that his audience, that he explicitly called to action to do so, should be shooting and killing people that they even so much as suspect as being right-wingers. Called for that call to action that happened over this past weekend. Were your beliefs given to you by your family, friends, society, etc.? No, politics was never really discussed in my family or old friend groups. Who do you consider white? Those that are ethnically and culturally European. By what percentage? This is, again, the same problems with intersectionality. Who do you consider non-white? Those who are not ethnically and culturally European. Do you consider yourself a leader? No, just a partisan. You guys should play Civilization 2 if you want to know what he means by this use of partisan. Did or do you have ties to any other partisan freedom fighters, ethno soldiers? I support many of those that take a stand against ethnic and cultural genocide. This sounds exactly like a left-wing take. And then he names people. I've never heard any connections with other confirmed partisans, though. If convicted, do you expect to stay in prison? Yes, I do wish to see how the world plays out after all. If I become old in the same prison, I would only assume that we have passed the point of no return and will die out, and that I have failed. If we do rise up against the replacers, I expect that I will be let out and honored amongst my people. Here is a reason, and the left-wingers should be in agreement with me. Here is the reason for the death penalty. Because This is the person that by virtue of so much as being alive will act as a statue towards these violent actions. By virtue of so much as existing, he will be able to spread a continued message. This is the rationale for, even if you're a libertarian, like if you're gonna have capital punishment, this is it right here. This is why. Why do you care so much about Europe? Aren't you an American? The United States, just like the rest of the colonies of Europe, is simply an offshoot of European people, a finger in the hand of the body of Europe. And that is why it is systemically racist. That is why it is irredeemably, the racism of this country is baked into its founding, right? Again, this is exactly what the left would say. They would actually agree with this. The origins of my language are European, my culture is European, my political beliefs are European, my philosophical beliefs are European, my identity is person of color, and most importantly, my blood is person of color. Answers to my people supporters question, what are your views? I would prefer to call myself a populist. But you can call me an ethno-nationalist, eco-fascist national socialist if you want. I wouldn't disagree with you. Okay then. Well, I mean, you are. Who do you support? Those that wish for a future for white children and the existence of our people. Who do you follow? No one person in particular. I support many groups, but I'm a member of none. Are you a Fed, shill, Mossad agent, false flag, patsy, imposter, Antifa, three-letter agent, glow so bright, etc.? No, I don't think so. Who knows? Maybe it's the 2 shots of COVID vaccine juice. Oh my God, I should have read the sentence before I read it out loud. Yeah, I can't finish that sentence. It's healthy to have skepticism, of course, but don't let your skepticism turn you away from people who support you. What do you encourage us to do? Make plans, get training, form alliances, get equipped, and then act. The time for meekness has long since passed. The time for a democratic solution has long since passed. Men of the West must be men once more. Is this your complete writings and views? My Discord transcript should also be available, which is much less formal than this and covers some personal and other information. I would have put a lot more work into this manifesto if I had the time to. God, my throat is getting sore. I kind of want to stop this because we've gone over the main points. So detractors. Won't your attack do more harm than good? No, there isn't a successful, influential grand movement established just yet. And no leading organ. This is the exact argument Vosh made in his debate with Stefan Molyneux. The exact argument he made for calling for violence. No, there isn't a successful, influential grand movement established just yet, and no leading organizations. So there is no great structure created that could be brought to harm. That's exactly what Vosh said. Word for word, what Vosh said. Oh. As far as how the public perceives us, did they perceive us any differently after the attack than they did before? Won't your attack result in calls for removal of gun rights in the United States? Yes, that is the plan all along. You said that you would fight to protect your rights and the Constitution. Soon will come the time. Again, I mean, the means, the consideration for the means isn't even there. It's just the ends are what I'm looking for. Period. At all costs. The ends don't just justify the means. The means justify themselves, and the ends justify themselves, and the means don't matter. This is left-wing rhetoric 101. This is straight out of Vosh's mouth and into this terrorist chamber. You're a bigot, racist, xenophobe, Nazi, fascist. Okay, and do you see, folks, what this gets you? Do you see what this gets you? When you call everyone all of these things, then when it comes time to actually find the person who is that, they're just going to say, yeah, whatever. Who cares? It's going to be impossible to differentiate between this and somebody who read the bell curve, right? And just read the data. Do you actually believe this garbage? Yes, I have never felt more sure about anything else. Sounds like a member of Antifa. Democracy is the only solution. Why are you committed to force? Democracy is mob rule, and the mob itself is ruled by our enemies. Straight out of Vosh's mouth. This is Leninism 101. The global and corporate-run press controls them. The education system, long since fallen to the long march through the institutions carried out by the Marxists, controls them. The state, long since heavily lost to its corporate backers, controls them, and the anti-white media machine controls them. Do not suffer under the delusion of an effortless, riskless, democratic victory. Prepare for war, prepare for violence, and prepare for risk, loss, struggle, death. Force is the only path to power and the only path to true victory. This is just word for word what Vosh has used to get to as his means to achieve his desired end. Violence isn't the answer. Why are you using force? There is no nation in the world that wasn't founded by or maintained by the use of force. The United States is irredeemable, right? Like, this is exactly what the left wing says. Force is power. History is the history of power. Right out of Marx's mouth. Right out of AOC's mouth. Right out of the entire left wing's mouth. Violence is power, and violence is the reality of history. Violence is the only way to make real change in the world. The reason why peaceful protests are allowed is because they don't make an actual difference. This sounds exactly like the anti-fascists right now. It sounds exactly like the words from what Antifa said. This is word for word Vosh's rhetoric. What makes you think that you have all the answers? I don't, but I may have some. Take my views, that which works, discard that which does not. Victory is all that matters. What makes you believe you can speak for a group? I speak for my views and my ideals and those that support me. Some may agree with them, others won't. What makes you believe you are European and not just American? I am a descendant of ethnic Europeans, so I must be an ethnic European myself. What makes you believe there are racial differences and that those matter? Research and data, haplogroups, phenotypes, and globalized testing. To try to explain many of these below, I'm not going to have the energy for that. Why do you blame immigrants and not the capitalists? Both are the problem. Folks, it's right there. This guy is not a right-winger. I don't think we have to go any further than this. Let's just finish this paragraph because my throat is on fire right now, and I'm ready to call it quits. And it's 9:30, and I'm tired. But let's just finish this. Both are the problem, and I would like to address the concept of hard and soft targets here. Hard targets are people with strong political powers, such as presidents, prime ministers, judges, media producers, and military leaders. Soft targets include the everyday man with low, weak political power. To cleanse an area, both must be removed. One cannot only attack the blacks of Buffalo and expect the Zogbot government to fall as well, just as one cannot attack the Zogbot government and expect the blacks to fall. Both have to be addressed. I'm simply attacking one at a time. Okay. This is, there it is. Undeniable at that point. I've shown you enough of the manifesto now that unless he's going to completely do a 180 in the next several pages, and as I'm scrolling through this, I started browsing 4chan, whatever, and then it's just basically like extrapolating the bell curve here. Let's intelligence and genetics. It's just race realism. The rest of this is just race realism. But I will begin by saying that IQ tests are quite a controversial subject in measuring intelligence. Mental ability is very abstract and hard to measure. IQ tests are often flawed in measuring people's individuality, but testing in large groups, such as the test above, is much more effective. As seen in this famous bell graph of white and black distributions of IQ, the average white is about one standard deviation above the black, or about 15 IQ points higher. How can this be, you ask? I will first go into the data that are accurately references genetics as being a key factor. It is 100% true that genetics is, I would say, the principal motivator for what's causing, for what translates to IQ and what we see as generic G, if you will, in terms of genetic intelligence, in terms of generic intelligence. But that doesn't mean there isn't something else at influence as far as why the disparity exists. And genetics, it's true that skin tone and skin color is almost entirely genetic. It's true that height is genetic. almost entirely genetic. It's true that things like eye color is basically entirely genetic, but they're not necessarily entirely linked. It's not necessarily a perfect causal link that because dark, therefore stupid, right? So again, this reads, there's the whole point of me doing this is so you guys can understand where this guy's coming from. And I don't know how you get a right-wing prescription out of this. The right wing subscribes to the Martin Luther King Jr. vision of racism and race, and the way that people ought to be treated based on these immutable characteristics, which is they shouldn't have any value judgment ascribed and made against them or towards them because of these immutable characteristics. They shouldn't be made as considerations for any sort of value judgment. The intersectionalists disagree. The left wing today disagrees with that. So this is an utter rejection of everything the right wing has said about race, at least over the last 50 years, possibly 60 years. It's a complete rejection of what the right wing has said for hundreds of years about the sanctity of law and order. This reads just like taking the left at their word and then extrapolating the Nick Fuentes vision of white nationalism and white supremacy from that left-wing vision of race and racism and politics in general. This reads like if Vosh decided one day, because his philosophy, his meta-ethics, which basically don't exist, allow him to, right? He's viewing the entire world through the collectivist lens, just like Vosh. He's saying that the ends are the only consideration. Not that the ends justify the means. The means aren't a consideration to be made here. He's saying that he understands what he's doing is incredibly violent, and that what we need is a revolution, and that what he's doing is to inspire said incredibly violent upheaval of everything for which this country has stood. This isn't right wing. So now that you guys have seen it, I hope you guys will understand when the left says that this is going to get labeled as a right-wing terrorist attack because racism, right? This guy is a racist on no uncertain terms. And we can take him at his word when he says he's a racist. This guy is a white nationalist and a white supremacist. And we can take him at his word when he says that. But he gets to those conclusions through a perfect adoption of the left-wing lens. An absolute, like the Venn diagram is a circle, right? In terms of how he gets to those conclusions. So yeah, like you just, if you've heard that this is left wing or that this is right wing, you've been gaslit. And chances are the data on right wing terrorism is again, a gaslighting. Chances are when it comes to things like folks whose first name starts with Omar, right? You're not going to get the left wing worldview that perfectly aligns with the motivation that we're not allowed to talk about on YouTube. All these people that I can't get any further than that. We're risking getting kicked off perma-banned on YouTube anyways. So yeah. So again, I just did this so you guys understand where this guy is coming from. That yes, this guy is deranged. And when I said these type of people need to be institutionalized, that gun control won't work for these people. That everything that the left is spreading in terms of their rhetoric on the mainstream media and in mainstream politics absolutely is causing these things to take place. And it goes right down to the left-wing ethos. It's exactly those arguments that caused this guy to think the way he did and to act the way he did. Unfortunately, the only thing that you can do with somebody like this is mandate institutionalization. And probably like I said before, for decades. And no, this guy was not right-wing. He was explicitly left-wing. And now you have that information. So I showed you guys how to check into that. I'm not going to get into any further detail on that matter. Let me see if anyone joined in on the conversation. It doesn't look like it. So thanks for staying tuned. My throat's on fire. We'll see you next week, probably Sunday at 7. I was out of town this weekend, so it was too tough to get to the normal Sunday night at 7. But anyways, I genuinely greatly appreciate everyone that watches the channel, that watches the show. And we will see you guys all next week at 7 at the normal time. Good night.